Welcome to the Agility in Real Life podcast, Take 5 in Real Life. Now your hosts, Mike Studeman, Jeff Lee, and Pat Campbell.
Hello and welcome back to the Take5IRL podcast. I'm Jeff Lee, a partner at Agility IRL, and your host for this episode. And I have a special guest joining me this time. It's Peter Borsella of Big Orange Square. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, so those of you who've been following us on recent episodes know that we've been talking about medical device and getting into the firmware hardware side of things, which made me think I needed to reach out to Peter. Because Peter is not only a certified Scrum trainer, but he has been really focused on the hardware side of things for a long time and actually training people on how to use Scrum and Agile methods with hardware for a while. So, Peter, I'm just going to kind of kick it over to you. And if you want to give our audience here an overview of what you've done, what you've seen, and yeah, I'll let you take it from here.
Well, sure. Thanks. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully I can share some things that folks might find interesting. I certainly found it interesting because I got my start in the Agile movement in software, like so many people.
Right.
But very quickly, right, discovered that there is a lot of interest outside of software. But that interest, what I found, started in other areas of the organization, such as like accounting and HR,
Uh-huh.
right, marketing, things like that. But then I guess maybe about 8 to 10 years ago, started getting more inquiries about physical product delivery. And that's where I've been spending a lot of time with my business partner, Hubert Smits. We created Big Orange Square separate from our existing companies. So Hubert has his consulting company, Smits MC, and I have Winnow Management. But we decided we needed to join forces and create something separate just so that people would understand, this is a specialty area, this business of bringing agility into the physical space.
Yeah, it's interesting because Agile, of course, has roots in the Toyota way, right? Which is very much hardware oriented. And a lot of people think of it, in software. It works really well with software. How did you go about, moving from this software background and bringing in a hardware aspect?
I appreciate the question because as we started poking around, right, and talking to organizations about what they were experiencing and what they were trying to accomplish, and bumping up against some other agilists, right, who were trying to help in those areas too, we found something, Jeff, quite honestly, that was a little uncomfortable for us, caused us to question. What we found is that these organizations were being led down a path to follow the Agile movement in the almost exact same way that the software industry moved to the Agile movement. Now, on its surface, that might sound, well, yeah, so what's the problem, right?
Right, that sounds good.
Sounds good. The problem is it is so different. There are aspects of industrial production that come nowhere close to representing what people building software are dealing with. Now, they're both complex environments,
Mhm.
complicated environments, right? They both have many challenges. I mean, we look at the software industry, and Jeff, we've both been around a little while at least, right? You remember,
Couple years.
right? So in the old days of the software agility movement, getting software programmers and testers together in the same room was a big deal.
Right,
Right.
right, right.
Right. And then what about the DBAs? Can we get them in the same room? And then we start talking about ops, and now you have DevOps, right? So now you're bringing these different security. You start bringing them into the same room. When we're talking about bringing that same concept into physical product delivery, well, you have someone who might be an electrical engineer and someone else who's a mechanical engineer.
Mhm.
And those two disciplines are vastly different from each other. It's not like, oh, yeah, well, I can dabble across boundaries there.
Right,
You
that
know,
whole
they've
T-shaped
spent,
people thing, does it
yeah,
look a little bit
right.
differently in hardware?
Yeah, exactly. They've spent years, focusing on that craft and that area of expertise. And now let's bring in people that are experts in supply chain management and people that are experts in mass production and manufacturing. And they are so diverse that we can come to the same room, but the expectations that they're going to be able to operate as a cross-functional team
Hmm.
gets stretched, quite a bit. It starts to raise some questions about the practical aspect of that. I'm sorry, I'm talking for a while. Can I keep going for another
Yeah,
minute?
no, absolutely. So I'm very, I think this is where you're going, but is that something
Yeah.
that you try to fight against and get it to happen like software, or do you accept some limitations here and treat it differently?
Right. It's staying with the basic principles, but recognizing that the implementation of that, it's going to look different. So can we, and look, most organizations are referring to Scrum as their framework. There's others, right? We know that, but most of us understand things about incremental delivery and team-based models and short cycles, right? And we understand, things like that. So we want to bring those same principles, but hey, short cycles, right? I mean, look at the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto says 2 or 3 months could be a cycle time. Scrum says, hey, no longer than a month.
Right.
Right. So there's some room for discussion, right, about what would make sense for any particular environment. Bringing people together, right, to help plan the work. It still makes sense, but it's not quite the same as putting those 12 different disciplines all on the same cross-functional team and expecting them to produce something that's a valid piece of incremental progress in a couple of weeks. That's where we have found the biggest um, challenge, I guess, in recognizing that some of these organizations have that same desire to move towards greater levels of agility,
Mhm.
but you can't just take Scrum out of the box, right? And drop
Mhm.
it down and say, okay, let's start scrumming, for example. Right. That's and it kind of reminds me of where software was 15 years ago.
Okay.
You got to
So
start thinking differently about it.
yeah, so focusing on principles, always a good thing, right? Even in a software environment, right? Focusing on principles is better than focusing on, what are the rules of what we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
You mentioned the short cycle times. Are there other key principles that you think apply well to manufacturing, to hardware?
Yeah, well, so the business about the team-based model, right? Um, when we look at the software environment, and I know I mentioned this already, but I want to come back to it because I think it's pretty important. How did we end up with the DevOps movement? Well, because when we started building these cross-functional teams, they would produce something and then they would turn it over to
Hmm.
the next area,
Yeah,
the
as somebody who is a
operations area.
software developer, I love that turnover thing, right? Oh, it's not my problem
That's
anymore.
right, off it goes, right? And maybe you're just crossing your fingers that you won't get a call at 1 in the morning, right? Because what you built broke. But there was this handoff, right? And people started saying, well, wait a minute, why do we have this handoff? We're supposed to be coordinated together, tightly focused. So now you have DevOps. Now that's a terribly oversimplified description, but I think it fits. I think it fits, right? Okay, so now picture you're building you're building a new one of these, right? Or building a new one of these. There's this handoff that takes place, right? So you have your designers and they're coming up with ideas, for this. And at some point when it's valid for mass production, now you turn over to supply chain, you turn over to manufacturing, and they take over. And what happens? Just like what we saw in software. Supply chain gets it and says, well, we can't get this material. That hasn't been available for the past year. Manufacturing says, oh, shoot, we have to retool in order to accommodate this size. We've never operated on something with this diameter before. And everything gets stretched out. So we're trying to take that same idea, and again, it's a parallel, right, that happened with DevOps, and say, well, hold on a second. Why are we handing over? Why are we turning over? Why are we, and you know this term, why are we throwing this over the fence, right,
Oh
to
yeah.
the next area?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we promote, and this has been a big cultural change, Jeff, for the organizations, is throughout the whole product development life cycle, have representation from all those areas participate. They're not part of the focused cross-functional team that's spending 8 hours a day on it. But when you're in the early stages of design, why not have someone from supply chain? Why not have someone from manufacturing come for periodic discussions, right? Look at the roadmap, try to understand what's coming, get ahead of the curve, offer suggestions that could influence the design
Mm-hmm.
to make the manufacturing process, run more smoothly.
Yeah.
And the reason why I said that that's one of the biggest cultural changes is because those folks, supply chain and manufacturing, they're not used to being asked to come in 2 years before they're being asked to
Right.
participate, right? Because we're talking about things that might take
Yeah,
years,
long lead times, right?
right, to complete. And now we're being asked, you want me to come to a discussion about a product that I'm not going to have to worry about for 2 years? And then showing them the benefit, right, of them hearing what's coming and being able to contribute
Mm-hmm.
and influence, right,
Yeah.
the plan and the design for the product.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of parallels with software as well, right? To get your designers, your engineers involved as requirements are being figured out because they're going to may have completely different approaches that might get things, better, faster, more elegant, all those things. I can definitely see why that would be helpful. And, all the
Yeah.
what you described on the manufacturing floor, all those, if you have to retool a bunch of machines, that's not quick.
Right, right. And if you don't account for that, all of a sudden you find yourself delayed, right? Oh, shoot, this is going to take us a lot longer than we thought. Just a really quick example. So I just use supply chain and manufacturing as examples. We worked with a client that was designing a new, it's kind of like a teller system, where a bank representative would sit at this machine that processes bills,
Mhm.
paper, currency, right, and such. And brought the servicing department into the design discussions. And the servicing representative says, hey, can you move that power supply to the front instead of in the back? Because that's our most frequent service call. And we got to pull the whole thing out to get to it in the back. But if you can put it in the front, I can just open the door and get right to it. And the designers say, sure, we can do that. No problem. But they had never been asked that question before because they two never spoke to each
Yeah,
other.
yeah. Yeah, oh, fantastic. That's a huge win and such a simple thing. But again,
Yeah.
going back to your point, you got to have the right people in the conversation at the right time for that to happen.
Right. And Jeff, you mentioned the roots, right? Uh, you know, this this really shouldn't be anything terribly new to us, but it is. Right? This goes all the way back to World War II with Lockheed Martin and the Skunk Works project, right? And then Japanese manufacturing, the lean movement. I mean, it's
Mhm.
interesting that Agilists, proclaim the value, the benefit of being lean. Well, that where that comes from, right? It comes from physical product
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
development. So it feels like the software industry took off and physical industry didn't keep up with that movement. They focused on things like Lean and Six Sigma, and now they're seeing like, hey, there's another opportunity for us, right? That maybe we want to get on board with.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm going to call a wrap on this episode. Hopefully that's a good overview for people and really extolling some of the benefits of these agile principles in hardware. We're going to have another episode coming up with Peter to get a little bit deeper into some of these concepts. So if you're seeing this right when it was released, you might have to wait a few days, but most of you are probably seeing this when the next episode's out there waiting for you. So anyway, I'll call this one a wrap. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Take 5 IRL podcast. If you like it, please go ahead and share it with someone, as well as like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Also, leave us a comment or a suggestion for a future episode. Again, thanks for listening, and we look forward to you joining us next time on the Take 5 IRL podcast.